that is here from the NRC. Erik's going to be talking about government funding and how startup tech companies can access this funding, exactly what the process would look like. So yeah, everybody wants to give him a hand.
Good. Everybody can hear me okay? That's very loud here, but just coming over a cold, so I'll sound pretty funny today. But welcome to everybody. So I'm glad to have been invited again by CodeCore to talk a little bit about how government funding programs and other resources work, and especially for companies, for people that are looking to either work at a startup or start their own startup. It's good to be aware of all this information. Some of the programs and information I'll be talking to you might be a little bit early in the process, but at least you can be aware of it so you can make a proper planning for your total fundraising efforts. So I'm with the National Research Council, which is a federal government agency, and we're within a new service that was created just over a year ago called the Concierge Service. And it was actually specifically created because across the federal government and provincial and regional governments, there's actually close to 100 different types of programs available that can help small businesses. So they basically have to create another program called the Concierge Service to help companies figure out what all these programs are. And it's really meant for small business startups to have a personal resource available that they can talk to. So what makes us unique is that we're not just a website where you can go and Google these programs and can read up about it. We actually have one-on-one conversations with the people running the company, get to know them a little bit, understand what their business is, what they have been doing, what they will be doing, and based on that we give personalized advice on the most relevant programs that you should be looking at in more detail. And then we can also make some introductions to people within those programs if applicable. And it's really meant for any stage company. You'll see that there's a pretty broad range of programs available that may or may not apply to you. And it's primarily meant for companies that are doing something innovative. So a lot of funding goes to companies that are investing in R&D or developing a new product, a new service, trying to target a new market, create a new business model, anything that's innovative and where you're trying to grow a company in Canada and ultimately create jobs. That's what the government is interested in most, is to help companies that ultimately will grow and create jobs in Canada. A little bit about the process. So typically people contact us, so we're advisors within the government. There's no cost, any kind of obligation in talking to us. It's your tax dollars at work. It's the government spending their tax money on making resources available. We often meet people at events like this, of course, where at the end we will swap business cards, or I'll give you my business card and hopefully you'll contact me. And then what we typically do is set up a quick phone call or a face-to-face meeting. Typically takes about 30 minutes or so to kind of get to know the basics of your business. And then based on that, we'll walk through some of the programs and discuss the ones that are most relevant. And in the end, I typically follow up with the details of those programs in an email and appropriate introductions where needed for each program. So it's a pretty painless process. Typically it's less than about an hour of your time commitment. Whereas if you go and do this yourself and try to do this research, try to Google funding and government of Canada, you'll spend the next 3 weeks reading websites that are probably more confusing than informative. So, easier to talk to a person. So before we go into some of the details of the programs, we often have to work with companies and founders to make them understand sort of what it takes to get government funding. We're not a cash machine that you just walk up to and the money magically spits out. There's what we call some table stakes required for most programs that you'll see that you need to qualify for before you can start accessing this funding. And you'll see that this pretty much maps to anything that most equity investors would ask you as well. Right? So anybody that's going to put money into your company, whether it's the government or private people, are going to ask very similar questions. Right? But for government funding, there's some specifics ones, right? So one of the things that you typically need to do to qualify is at some point you need to get incorporated as a business, right? It's a formal process, but it's pretty painless as well. You can actually just walk to the Waterfront station into Small Business BC office, and in about half an hour you'll be able to get yourself incorporated for about $100. And you got some toolkits as well if you want to do it yourself, but it's fairly painless to make your company an official one rather than just a sole proprietorship. As I mentioned, most money is earmarked with innovation or R&D related activities. Right? So opening up a pizza restaurant has less funding available than investing in a new technology.
Excuse me.
Sure.
For the technology, could you temporarily treat your residential as the office?
Yeah.
As the address is your office.
It doesn't have to be a formal office.
Yeah, that's right.
You just need to have an address.
That's an old.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, feel free to ask questions as we go along. We'll try to keep this as informal and interactive as possible. The other thing that most people will look at is how committed are you to this? Right? Is this your full-time activity, or are you doing this on the weekends? Right? If it's a hobby, you usually end up not qualifying for a lot of funding. Right? It has to be something that you're investing in, you're taking some risk as well. Quick question there?
Yeah, sorry if you already mentioned this. What's the difference between this concierge service and IRAP?
So IRAP is one of the funding programs.
One, okay.
I'll talk about it a little bit more. The concierge service, we are actually part of IRAP.
Because they do kind of the same thing. You can call and you talk to them for like
Yes.
half hour. You tell
Yeah,
them
but that's specifically to see if you would get money from IRAP.
from IRAP.
Yeah, so we're kind of across all programs,
Okay.
even though we roll up organizationally under IRAP as well. A business plan is something that, for some programs, you need to have something that's a bit more elaborate, typically when it involves a loan. For other ones, it needs to be something a little less formal, right? It could be a lean canvas kind of thing, or at least a PowerPoint deck that's kind of your pitch deck that's a bit more elaborate. You basically have to demonstrate that you've thought about the market, right? You've done some market research, you kind of know the financials behind it, you have a business model, kind of know that you've spent some time thinking about what your business is going to be like, right? Not just your product, it's thinking about your business. How are you going to fund it? How are you going to grow it? How are you going to market it? Who are you going to sell to? Those kind of things. Right? I'll talk a bit about some of the accelerators locally that help you go through that process to have a more structured program, to have you find out what your business is and if there's a market opportunity. But that's something that's needed for funding in most cases. And most funding is matching. Right? You'll never be able to fund a company 100% based on government grants. You can leverage it, but at some point you need to put some of your money in it, whether that's your savings, your sweat equity, time and effort, or some of the love money, right? Family and friends that want to take an early gamble on you. Typically you need to put some money into the company first before you can start qualifying for matching funds.
Sorry. Quick question about the equity. What is the range? Could you give some examples for the ranges in equity that would be matched and what you would be looking for?
Well, usually the bare minimum is 50-50.
50-50.
Right? So if you want a $10,000 grant, you need to put $10,000 in yourself. That's kind of the easiest rule of thumb. Right? I'll have some specific case studies where I'll show some examples as well. But yeah, there's no hard number. But getting more than 50% of your funding from the government would be very impressive.
Right.
Now, sweat equity can get valued as sort of cash equivalent, right? And that's where it gets a little bit more loosely defined.
Is it harder to get the match as the amount of equity increases?
You'll probably get a lower percentage.
Lower percentage. Okay.
Yeah. So as you increase your equity, your government percentage might go down a bit.
Okay.
Right? But again, any funding that I'm going to talk about, they're not automatic, right? You have to qualify for it. It needs to make sense. A lot of the programs are competitive.
Right.
So you're competing with other companies chasing the money.
Of course.
Right? So a lot of what you'll see is examples of what you can do.
Cool.
But but it's all case by case basis.
Thank you.
Sweat equity, how do you calculate that? It's
How do
man
you-
hours?
How do you calculate sweat equity?
Well, for example, if I say if I have work, I charge this much money per hour, and I've already put 40 hours on this project, is that my sweat equity?
That would be your sweat equity. Yeah, it's basically the value associated with your time and effort that you've put in. So if your normal market rate is $15 per hour, and you've worked 40 hours on it, you just put in $2,000 equivalent sweat equity into your company. Now, sweat equity is not an official term, right? It's an unofficial term because it doesn't exist. But you'll see that a lot of startups have a large portion of what equates to sweat equity, which is the founder's time and effort that they put in without getting paid, right? But they're choosing to invest their time and effort to grow the company. On paper, it's meaningless, right? But in reality, that's how a lot of startups
So
start.
is the government going to match that too?
In some cases, they'll be able to associate a value to that as your part of the contribution to a project.
Just going back to the very first point, in the US, sometimes investors will say to hold off on incorporation and then eventually they incorporate in Delaware. Is there like a rule of thumb for Canada or?
No, this is mostly if for certain programs you have to be incorporated, right? Some of these programs for you to apply, they'll only talk to a company, they don't talk to a person. Right? That's why I'm saying this, right? But yeah, if you're not applying for any of these programs,
And then in terms of location, is there a matter where or there's no Delaware for?
no. I mean, speaking for certain programs, like certain programs would be regional, right? So there's some programs where you have to be a BC-based company, right? Most of them are Canadian-based company. Yeah, it's easiest to start getting incorporated here. One of the things I'm not really talking about in the presentation, but within BC, that's the BC Investors Credit, if you guys have heard of that. Right, so if you register as a company in BC, and you want to attract angel investors, right, you have to register as an eligible company in BC, and then eligible investors in BC, when they put money into you, they would get a 30% tax credit. Right, so if you start going and pitch to angel investors, that's pretty much a must-have these days to attract BC investors' interest, is that you qualify under that eligibility rule, so that the investors can get their 30% tax credit. Right? But that only becomes an issue if you start talking to private investors that are eligible and that want to take advantage of that tax credit. And that's BC specific, so you have to be a BC corporation.
In what quarter is the application for that actually handed out?
For what?
The BCC tax credit? The 30% tax credit?
Which quarter is it allocated?
In what month? Usually at some point in the year they allocate the funds and then
No, that's a tax credit that goes to the individual investors.
I understand, but the company who applies to be eligible to offer the tax credits to their investors, they need to do that by a certain amount of time before the available funds are all allocated to other companies.
No, there's no allocation of funds in the program.
There's no cap.
Okay. So you just need to register, and then when you start raising funds, the individual investors would claim their tax credit. But there's no ceiling of funds associated with that. They just get a refund on their taxes.
I have a question that's follow up on this. So basically the reason to not incorporate, to choose an incorporate location is corporate tax. I assume different provinces have different corporate tax brackets, and which province has the lowest corporate tax? Because I've done.
I don't know off the top of my head. I know BC is one of the more attractive funds. Programs like, we'll talk a bit about STRAT, which is another tax credit. So that's the highest of that one is in BC. So in general, BC is actually a pretty good province to incorporate in. Yeah. But I'm not a tax lawyer, so if you want to drill out into that, I can connect you with some people. But in general, there's not much downside of getting incorporated in BC. Yeah. Anything else? We'll be here for the next 3 hours apparently. I'll get my parking. Good. Anything else? Don't be shy. So the other thing is that for most programs, you also need to kind of know what you're actually going to be doing in the short term. right? You can't walk up to somebody and says like, I need a lot of money, right? It's like, know how much you need, or ideally would need, know what you're going to be using it for. Again, you gotta kind of have a plan in place before you start applying for programs. Like I said, there's a lot of programs, right? And they can be anywhere from federal government to local city ones. I'll talk about a few, but my key message here is that if you're really interested, make sure you talk to me one-on-one afterwards, or set up a meeting, because there's always more programs available. There's always more programs that come up after the presentation that I might be able to connect you with based on your specific situation. So funding is a pretty broad term, and it comes in very different shapes and sizes and flavors. Right? So I kind of put them all under the big funding header, but there's grants, right? We just straight up money without any obligation or equity or payback requirement. Those are obviously the most attractive and most popular. So there's a few of those ones. There's always business loans, which a lot of tech startups don't really want, but they are available, especially if you're a young entrepreneur. There's funding in the form of tax refunds. Right? So as you're doing R&D, experimental development, and you're actually spending money on salary or contracts, you might be able to get a tax refund on that. So that's a way of funding R&D in Canada from the government perspective. There's internships, where you basically get grants or any kind of other payment towards bringing in students or people to help you build your product. So that's a popular way to kind of take advantage of government funding to help build your business. There's a program, I'm not going to talk about it today, but there's a program where the Canadian government would actually purchase your highly innovative product. Right? They could become your first customer. So that's sort of funding in the form of actually the government buying your product. And one very big category is hiring grants. So again, as you as a company are growing and you want to bring in people, there's a lot of hiring grants available if you want to give somebody a job, typically towards people that are young, which in the government perspective is usually between 15 and 30 or 15 and 39. It's a pretty broad catchment. But yeah, anytime you as a company are looking to employ people, the government will make a lot of money available for you to make that easier to get you over that hump and bring in some people.
Question on behalf of hiring people, can you have the period of time? Can people oversee?
No, so whenever I talk about stuff here, remember it's the Canadian government, so the money you get has to be spent in Canada, right? The people you hire have to be Canadian typically. So there's a very strong Canadian flavor to it, right? So anytime the Canadian government money is going to go overseas or is going to go to somebody that's not a permanent resident, usually that doesn't qualify. Right? So keep that in mind.
I see, thank you. Quick question about your slide. I might have missed it, what is non-dilutive funding?
Non-dilutive funding is what, so if you're a company, right, let's say you start a company, so you're the shareholder, right? You have 100% equity in the company, but let's say you want to bring in an investor, right? So they put in money, they get part of the equity, right? So your share is getting diluted. Right? So now you only owe 80% of the company. Right? What most people want, ideally, is to get money into the company without having to give up a share of their equity. So that's called non-dilutive funding. So it doesn't dilute your ownership in the company. So
all these would constitute
the vast majority of government programs is non-dilutive. That's why they're popular.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. Like once you go to private equity, that's dilutive funding.
Got it.
Right? There's a few programs where there is equity participation. One program I'm not going to talk about in detail today is the Canada Media Fund. They provide a lot of funding, but they typically have some kind of a stake in the company as well that they take. But that's a pretty major source of funding, so that's usually a pretty specific discussion. But yeah, all of these are kind of considered non-dilutive types of funding to help you grow your business.
Got it. Thank you.
Good, so before we jump into the details of a few of these programs, just wanted to give you a bit of a case study. Anybody heard of Snarked? Nobody.
You want to try this?
They were on Dragon's Den, yeah. So they're kind of famous because they were a couple of years ago on Dragon's Den. They actually did end up getting money from one of the dragons, which is pretty rare. But basically, a bunch of Vancouver guys that started a social media app that connects professional hockey players, and they go after the minor hockey guys with fans. Right, so it's kind of a direct interaction between hockey players and fans. So that's the app they developed. One of the owners actually published a story about the history of how he grew Snarked and the funding he got along the way. So it made for a very good case study that's kind of very indicative of what you can do with government funding, but also that it's not that easy to do it. Right? So you see that in 2011 they actually started. So they have co-founders put in a lot of their time and effort, but they also put in about $35,000 of their own savings to kind of get the company going. And then as they started getting early traction, they apparently had a lot of family and friends that really loved them, and they put in another 120K. Right, so you see that's a pretty significant investment in the company. That was a good starting point, but that did position them to start leveraging a lot of the other funding.
Do you have any idea what the distribution of the family versus friends versus angels was? Okay.
So that's so up to 2012 they have no angels, right? So family and friends is usually a close round,
Yeah.
where you don't go out and have people that are typically angel investors get invested. But they started working early on with IRAP and got a financial contribution there. So that's an R&D grant to pay for part of the product development. And they also leveraged one of many types of hiring grants, in this case the Get Youth Working Grant. It's one of the smaller ones. It's about $2,800 per person. But they hired a couple of people and used that grant to pay for part of the salary. There's some bigger hiring grants. If you're hiring somebody that has graduated recently and you're sort of in a tech company, you can get up to $17,000 in hiring grants. The programs kind of come and go, and they have different terms and conditions and specific ones, but in most of the time, if you're looking to hire somebody like that and bring them on full time, that's a pretty big contribution to their salary if you can get $17,000 for their first year. And in 2013, that's when they did the whole Dragon's Den thing, right? And that's when they got the big investment from one of the dragons and some other angels of $380K. And then they leveraged that to go after one of the very big programs called the Media Fund, which is the fund that basically pays for all your TV and movies. But in the last few years, they've also been pretty heavily funding digital media development, right? And digital media is a pretty broad term that includes a lot of application and web development activities as well. So they got another $350,000. And you see here that that's actually called a recoupable investment. So it's not a full grant. It's one of these grants that you get the money, and then at some point in the future, if you make a lot of money, you have to pay it back, right? But it's got these terms and conditions that are pretty good deal, because if you don't end up making money, you don't have to pay it back. So they call it recoupable. In the case of profits, they'll recoup it. Otherwise, it's more of a grant type investment that they try to make. And then they also leveraged Shred, which I'll talk a bit about as a tax credit. So you'll see that if you add it all up, they got about $1 million in total funding over the last 5 years. And about half of that, they leveraged some kind of government funding. Right? So that's the Nondilutive. Getting some of it is grants, some of it is that recoupable investment. But that's so they were very effective in working the system and lining up the different programs and stacking them together. So that's it's a really good case. It's not a typical case, of course, but you can see what the opportunities are if you're kind of playing the system the right way and you have the right type of products that you're investing in.
For the CMF, do they take the equity when they give the recoupable investment?
It really depends. They kind of have different terms and conditions depending on what flavor of grant you get. So in some cases they will take equity, yes. In some cases they do it more as a on-paper equity only. But in general, if you can get money from CMF, it's usually a good deal compared to getting it from investors.
Yeah.
The reason I'm not talking about CMF is because it's, in detail is because it's a pretty heavy program. To apply for it, you really need to know what you're doing, and it takes about 2 months to write a proposal.
Okay.
So if anybody's interested in discussing that and pursuing that, we can take it offline. But it's definitely one of the programs that you can get a lot of money out in sort of the digital space.
Which ones of those are diluting and which ones are not diluting?
So the only one that would be diluting potentially would be the Canada Media Fund. But again, that depends a little bit on the specifics of the program that they participated in.
The angel investor ones will be diluting as well.
Oh yes, yeah. So the black ones are basically the gold ones are the government ones, right? So the equity, those will end with. Yeah. Good. So now we'll spend the next, we're pretty good on time, half an hour or so, just going over a few of the key programs. These are kind of the more popular programs, the broader programs that apply to more companies, or the ones that we get a lot of questions about. There's one missing here. Let's give me 1 second. Okay, let me just open up one other presentation. One of them got deleted.
You have a lot of presentations?
Huh?
Do you give a lot of presentations?
Yes, we do. Quite a few presentations.
We also did a slide deck as well.
I can distribute it afterwards. Yeah.
I was just thinking about this. It's gonna be 4 hours now. I don't know how that happened. I guess it's just one set of batteries for every tech. Not that it's a big deal.
It's all those questions they keep asking. Running out of batteries.
Yeah. I'll have to see.
Okay, can everybody still hear me?
I could
Pretty
hear you
good?
before.
Huh?
I could hear you before.
So SRED, SRNED, it's by far the biggest program in Canada. 23,000 companies take advantage of it. And it's something like $3 billion. And it's basically a tax credit on money that companies spend on eligible R&D. Right? So the eligible R&D has to be doing research and development in something that's experimental and scientific in nature. Right? So if you're developing the next Flappy Bird, that's not eligible. There has to be some kind of innovation, some level of risk. Usually it has to be done something that other people haven't done before, that you're trying to do. I'm not sure how it's going to work, but that's why it's research and development and experimental in nature.
What if you're making a new Flappy Bird, but you're developing a brand new artificial intelligence system to run it?
So part of that project, so if you're developing a new Flappy Bird with a special secret AI engine behind it, your entire project might not be eligible, but that artificial intelligence engine might be eligible. Right? So with SRED, one of the key things is that you need to understand what part of what you're doing is eligible. Right? That's the portion you need to document, and you need to track people's time against that project. Right? So if you spend 40 hours a week designing that new Flappy Bird, and 10 of those hours are on the AI engine, then 25% of your salary would be eligible to be claiming back as the SRED tax credit. Right? So that's the other key component. So once you know what part is eligible, it only becomes relevant if you're paying somebody money. Again, it has to be in Canada. Right? You cannot pay somebody in Russia to develop this for you. So if you're paying a salary or you're paying a contractor in Canada, that portion you can then claim back. You as a company can then say that, hey, I spent $50,000 on salary on this R&D project. Right? What portion is eligible for that? In BC, you would get 60% back of whatever portion is eligible. Right? So it can be very significant. Right? Depending on how bleeding edge your work is, more or less could be applicable, but it is very attractive. This is actually the #1 program why a lot of companies are actually establishing offices in Canada, so you can take advantage of this tax credit. Right?
Just curious, are wearable devices, would they be eligible for this?
Depends on what you're doing, right? So yeah, if you're designing a new wearable device that nobody's designed in the past, and it's very risky, then yes, for sure. So usually in tech, obviously there's a lot of eligible projects going on, right? But if you're doing just another app or something that's been done before, then not the entire work might be eligible. Right? So what we typically do is, for people that haven't filed this before, you're not that familiar with it, we can actually get you set up to talk to somebody at the Canada Revenue Agency. And these are the friendly people at the Canada Revenue Agency that help you with your shred claim. They basically will, these are the same people that would review your projects when you do claim them, but they'll actually do a free consultation with you. They'll look at your project, they tell you what is eligible or not, they'll tell you how to document it, how to track time and all that stuff. Right? And in the end, if you do this in advance of the work, it's a lot easier because you'll be able to document the things on the fly. And then in April, while you file your taxes for your company, you just need to have your accountant fill out a few specific forms and have all your documentation ready to support it, and you will get that cash back.
Do you know what type of criteria they use to determine that, like broad strokes, as to what's kind of considered to be? Like, are they looking at one place and just like saying, hey, you're doing this, you see X, Y, Z, or that type of assessment? Or
And so the key term is experimental, right? So if you're doing something that has not been done before, that means that you're basically experimenting, right? You're trying to develop this, right? So you need to document what you're trying to do. If it fails, it's still eligible, right? Or if you have to try different ways, you just need to kind of keep documenting on the fly as to what you've been trying to do, right? But experimental in nature basically means that you can't look at somebody else like, oh yeah, they've done it this way, I'm not going to do it, but instead of red, I'm going to make it orange. Right? So that doesn't qualify because there's no real risk involved in your right. So experimental and risk are two of the key terms.
The advice I got before when I was doing Shred was that Shred wants to hear about all your difficulties, all your failures.
Yeah. So they want to know about what didn't work, just as well as what's worked, right? If something works right out of the chute, then it was probably not very experimental in nature, right? But again, this is a very gray area, right? I mean, there's definitely room for interpretation. That's why, especially if you're a first-time filer, it's great to actually talk to the people that will do the assessment in the end. Right?
Does it have to be a product, or can it be a program, or anything experimental in terms of actual tangible or intangible product, right?
Yeah, that's the result at some point in a product. I mean, services again gets a lot grayer. If you're trying to develop a new service, but nowadays with software, I mean the boundaries are blurring, right? Across a lot of different spectrums.
We got qualified for an API, something that did a bunch of machine learning. So it's not a product you give someone, but it's kind of like a service type thing.
Yeah.
So it's give you a plan as well.
Yeah, but it's basically it's meant for anybody that's doing R&D, right? You're investing, you're spending money on creating something new, right? That's where strategy gets into the picture.
Usually, how long for the R&D?
For the R&D,
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
You can put the
And
kind.
this is on a tax year basis, right? So every tax year, if you add up the amount of salary you've paid to people to do STRAT eligible projects, you get a refund on that, right? There's no ceiling, right? So whatever you can claim as eligible, you'll get it, right? There's no funds to be allocated or anything like that. It's a cash refund on your expenses. Right? So you have to spend the money. Right? So sweat equity and putting in your time and effort doesn't do much for this program, right? And then you file your taxes and you get the money back. Right? The one thing that we tell people about, which is getting more popular, is companies provide bridge loans on this, right? Because if you're spending money today in February on R&D, you wouldn't file until next year, and then it takes you another few months to actually get the check in the mail, right? So you could have like a 12 to 18 month window where you're out of pocket on these expenses. So for larger companies and larger projects, that could be significant. So there's companies that will actually give you a loan against that future tax refund to get that money now and then pay it off as you get your refund in.
That's good. For the loan will be interest free.
It wouldn't be interest free, but the private company is doing that, right? So, but they basically know you're going to get a tax refund, so that's what they use as collateral. Any other questions on Shred?
So I was just going to say, from what I've seen, the range going is about 12 to 18% as far as the interest they charging to the
Wow.
That's not bad.
it's a very lucrative business. Very, very.
I know, it's gonna go, people are like, that's not bad.
And some people will think that's really horrible, some people will think that's not bad, right? But, I mean, that's the cost of getting that money. I mean, there is a level of risk involved as well. I'm not sure if, like, BDC, Business Development Bank of Canada, is actually doing this now. I'm not sure if they're that high. They're a crown corporation, so they're usually a little bit friendlier. So they might be able to give you better terms than the 12 to 18.
Is the loan specifically to the company, or is it, personally you have to co-sign it?
No, it's specific to the company.
So no risk to personal assets.
No, but they don't actually usually fund, like if you never filed an SRD tax before, you would not get loan. Because there's no history, if you have tried to prove that you've gone through this, that you can get money from the government, that you do track the work.
Yeah, so there's 3 companies I know for sure that do that. So they all kind of have their own terms and conditions, right? Some will force you to work with their Shred guy, right? And they have to do the Shred filing for you so that they know that it's an eligible claim. BDC is probably the easiest one. They actually don't require you to have that full history or not. But for them, if you don't end up getting the tax refund, then it would convert into a regular loan against the business, but ultimately it would be against your personal guarantees, whatever your business would put in place as a personal guarantee against that loan. So yeah, BDC definitely, if you're interested, might be a good option to have a discussion with them to see if it can be a bit friendlier.
And just one final clarifying point on SRD itself. So it does not cover routine coding, it's about the experimental. That portion is actually pushing back.
Yeah, and anything that's routine or anything that's kind of, if you're just doing the UI portion, that's probably not going to qualify because that's pretty cookie covered these days. Right? So that's in software, it becomes a little bit vaguer as to what is experimental versus what is standard. But that's why it's good to talk to them because they'll ultimately assess it. Yeah, the other thing to know is that there's a lot of consultants that provide services to help you with your Shred claims. Right? It comes at a price. Right? They'll take a percentage of your refund. In some cases, it's great value for money because you can spend your entire time focused on the business. A lot of people, the other half of people will say, I'm going to do it myself. Right? I don't want to give up that 20-30% fee. Right? So it all kind of depends on how you value your time and how much you want to learn about this. If it is the first time you're doing it, if you're doing it in advance of all the work, you can do it on the fly, but it will require a bit of investment in understanding the program, knowing how to document it, and doing all that stuff, and working with an accountant that will ultimately do the paperwork for you as well. Let's switch back. Good. So the other big program is IRAP. Anybody who are working with IRAP? Has worked with IRAP? Familiar with IRAP? So this is probably the most popular program because this is kind of associated with grants, right? Financial contributions is the official term. But the IRAP, the Industrial Research Assistance Program, what's made it so popular is that they're one of the very few programs that invest in very early stage companies, very early on the risk-reward scale, and the majority of it is in the form of financial contribution, which is basically a grant, right? Completely non-dilutive. They basically pay for part of your R&D. In recent years, this has become very competitive, right? Everybody's chasing this money, right? So the way you need to look at IRAP is that you ultimately end up working with one of my colleagues, who's an industry technology advisor, an ITA. You need to build a relationship with them and basically think about them as private angel type investors that could potentially invest in your company, but their investment is from the government of Canada in the form of a grant, right? With the government of Canada being motivated by how many jobs are you going to be creating based on this investment, right? But they'll look at the same things that an investor will look at, right? It's like, what's the market potential? What is the technology? How risky is it, right? If there's no risk involved, it's not a good candidate. Is it way too risky? It's also not a good candidate, right? So you got to kind of have the right level of risk that there can be a good payoff, right? What does the management team look like? How much market research have you done? How much market validation have you done? All those things. How are your financials? They basically look at you through the same lens that an investor would look at, right? When they see the opportunity and the potential and they agree that there's something there that they can make a contribution to, then you could get money, right, in the form of a financial contribution, a grant, towards R&D. But again, very competitive, right? Especially in Vancouver, there's just so many startups. They're all chasing the same limited funds that that is becoming more and more difficult to do. But if you think you have a good fit, so you need to be a company, right? You need to be full-time, those kind of things. That's when you want to start building that relationship with an ITA, so that when the time is right and the funding is available, they'll work on a project with you. Right? Now, the ITAs also have access to other funding. One of the more popular ones is this youth employment grant, which is a lot easier to get, which is basically if you're looking to hire somebody that's a recent graduate, you can talk to them, and that grant would be $17,000 towards first year salary. It's a lot easier to get that grant. There's a lot of money available for that grant, and it's a great way for them to support small startups if the R&D grants aren't quite the right fit.
Is this one also super competitive? I mean,
No, this one is much less competitive.
much less? Okay.
I mean, it depends on people hiring, right? So, I mean,
Yeah.
if you're not hiring, there's no point in talking to you. But yeah, if you're on the verge of hiring somebody, you're kind of on that bubble. This is kind of meant to reduce the risk in bringing in somebody full time.
Got it.
So for the youth does it have to be, does the business already have to be generating revenue, or can it be, if they're hiring these days, there's pre-revenue and they're trying to...
Well, you need to be able to pay the person. It's a contributing grant, right? So it's not the full salary of a person. It's usually at a 50% matching funds, right? So yeah, you need to have money in the company to pay.
Right.
Whether that's investors' money or revenue generating money, that doesn't matter. Like you as a company need to say, I would like to hire somebody, right? I'm going to pay them $40,000, $50,000, whatever it is, right? But I'm kind of on the bubble. Well, this is supposed to get you over the bubble, bring that person in.
So we talk about the youth employment.
That's youth employment, right? Now, youth employment from IRAP is coming all from Employment Canada, right? Employment Canada has a huge amount of money for hiring grants. They gave it to different organizations to distribute it to companies across Canada, right? So IRAP is one of the ones that do it. Other organizations do it. They kind of come and go these programs. So whenever you're on the bubble of hiring, that's a good time to check in and see which program is kind of live and open and could be a good fit. They kind of all have their specific flavors and timing and amounts of money, but usually there is some kind of money available to help you bring people on board.
Do you apply for this before you hire someone? You have a target candidate in mind, you apply for this? Or let's say you want to hire 3 youth or out of college people to help you. And do you apply for this in advance to make sure you have the money before you actually commit?
So with the IRAP one, it's a matter of working with your ITA. So once you start working with an ITA, then you say like, hey, I'm looking to hire somebody in May, right? That way they can get started on the timing and you can get started on the timing. So it's kind of in parallel. Some other programs that are not through IRAP might have an application form that you need to fill out, or they may have another mechanism to manage it.
You said it's up to 17K, so that means, what is the determination as to how much they can buy? Is it like based on...
Usually it's linked to the salary, so it's a percentage of your salary up to a maximum. Right? So it's like 50% of whatever salary you pay, up to $70,000 matching. Right? So if you're paying somebody a decent salary, you'll eat it up pretty fast.
Does contractors count, or is it just only full-time?
This is to hire people.
A full-time employee. First year salary.
First year salary, towards first year salary.
So if you contract it out to a youth, it doesn't count?
Unless a contract is a first year salary.
No, because to hire someone with other overheads, maybe just contract someone, you can fire at will, and then you only...
Yeah, there's a big difference between hiring somebody and paying a contractor,
Yeah, like
right?
it says here, grants towards a first year salary, I'm looking at this.
There's EICP that has this.
what?
Quick question. How long does it take to write your proposal for this one? Or
Oh, it's pretty, this is not really a proposal, right? Again, you need to, for the IRAP version, you need to be working with an ITA.
Oh, okay, got
So
it.
once they know you and they know that, hey, you're looking to hire somebody, then they'll get you the paperwork to fill out. And this is not quite as intensive. Like, it's not really a competition,
Yeah.
right? This is more, are you hiring and are you aligned with the funds being available? Right, it's kind of the things have to align a little bit. But this one, they do quite a few of these, right? So it's relatively easy to get once you have that relationship established with an ITA.
Can you clarify the financial contribution for IRAP? I didn't really get what that was exactly.
So financial contribution is a different term for a grant.
Okay.
Right, so what the ITA would look at, so if you're looking to develop a product, right, again, they're going to look at sort of the riskier part of the project, right? So let's say, hey, I want to develop Flappy Bird, but I want to do this AI engine. Okay, this AI engine is going to cost me $50,000 to develop. Right? How do you determine that $50,000? That's kind of the time and material, right? That's the time and value of the people working on it. Right? If it's a $50,000 project, then IRAP might say, we're going to contribute $20,000 towards that project. Right? So you get $20,000 from IRAP, and you put in the other $30,000 to develop this AI engine.
Okay.
Right? That's why they call it a financial contribution. It's towards a project that helps you get your technology or get your product to market. Good. So this is literally hot on the press. We got this yesterday. This is another flavor of a hiring type grant. This one is interesting because it's actually for what they call underemployed people. Most hiring grants are for post-secondary graduates, right? So you have to have basically graduated in the last 18 months to qualify from a post-secondary institution. This one is actually for anybody that's underemployed. So underemployed can be somebody that doesn't have a degree, is looking for a job, or you have a degree, but you can't find a job in the area that your degree is in, right? So this is kind of for you as a company to bring on people and give them work experience, right? Bring them in, have them work on a project, and it's a $9.25 per hour salary subsidy towards their salary, right? And the terms of the program is that what you need to do is you need to hire somebody for 12 weeks at 35 hours per week and pay them the minimum wage, which is $10.25.
Oh, is it 10:25 now?
$10.25. So this program basically gives you somebody for 12 weeks at $1 per hour, right? For them to work on a project. So
We hired them to fire them in 12 weeks, and we hired them in another 2 weeks.
well, you can hire them and then lay them off after 12 weeks. Yes, I don't think you can rehire the same person back onto this program.
Oh, okay.
This would be a good way to bring someone in for an internship, you know?
Yeah, so this is kind of an internship program, right? So I mean, they say you just need to employ them for 12 weeks minimum, right? So they get basically 3 months of work experience out of this, right? Again, these are underemployed people, right? So they may not have the skills that you need. So they're trying to lower the risk for a company to give these youth a chance, right? It has to be somebody less than 30 years old.
But if you want an admin to just organize your paperwork or file your paperwork away,
Yes.
you definitely.
As long as there's experience.
So this could be this could contribute to like a co-op hire, right?
Well, yeah, co-ops kind of gets, yeah. So this is also available for people that are currently in this attending a post-secondary institution.
So if they're attending university and looking for a co-op, then they would be.
Yeah. Although co-ops usually pay more than $10 per hour.
Yeah.
Well, they're starving.
Most co-ops.
Is there a limit on how many people you bring in with this?
I haven't seen any limits yet. No.
Okay.
But it is, I mean, it's obviously the intent for this program is managed through the YMCA. You could make that work,
No,
right?
but yeah, I agree with that. Like, I've met another number of young engineers who have trouble getting their first job because no one wants to hire a real junior. But this would help. Like, especially the thing is, the companies, there's a cost to train someone. But when you do that cost, it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, and because it's the YMCA, they happily find people, and there's also some training aspect to it, right? So if there's any training requirements needed, they can help with that as well. So yeah, keep the creative juices flowing, and if you think there's an opportunity, we can connect you with the people at the YMCA to work it out.
This is also for an incorporated company. These are all corporations or corporate.
Yeah, you have to be a company to hire the people.
Two questions right now. The first question is, is there a specific limit to how many, how, for a specific company, is there a limit to a maximum number of?
I haven't seen a limit yet on the number of people you can
And the
hire.
second question is, when you guys present this to hiring, do you present it in a term of honorarium by chance, or do you just tell them, look, it's $10.25 an hour for a specific amount of leads?
Yeah, you're hiring somebody. Right, so you have a job description.
Right.
Right, so like I need to hire an admin. Right, you're going to work 35 hours a week. The pay is $10.25. This is what you need to do.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Then people will apply. Once you apply and you're part of this program, you pay them $10 and then you get $9 back.
Do you have to let them know this is part of, say, for example, the YMCA provided this kind of grant?
Yeah, I think what's typically is you work with the YMCA and they help with the job description and all that stuff, and they help you find the right candidates if you don't have them already. So they're kind of in the loop, right? And I mean, they need to monitor what's happening to where the money's going, right? So there's some paperwork to be done there, but it's obviously pretty attractive, potentially.
How large is the pool and how competitive it is to get? Pool of money.
So I don't know how much money there is, and I don't know how competitive it is.
Okay.
But it's literally just to open it up. Last December, they had a similar program called the Post-Secondary Youth Internship Program. So they opened it up in December. I think I talked about it back then in CodeCore. So between December and last week, they placed 40 people in that program. And that was an $8 per hour subsidy, but towards a $16 minimum salary. So that was to hire recent graduates and give them work experience. So they filled up 40 positions in BC in about 2 months. So I think this program is probably bigger, I would imagine. But yeah, if you have something and you apply, and then at some point they'll run out of money and they'll close it off. That's how these programs work. These kind of hiring type programs, usually they open up, and then as you draw back on the available funding, then they close up.
What is YMCA's incentive for offering this program?
So YMCA is what they call the delivery partner of, so this is Employment Canada money.
Okay.
So they work with different government, semi-government, corporations types to kind of do the administration. Right? So YMCA is just, they just process all the paperwork and track all the information, and they hire people to do it.
Can companies of any size do this, or is this just tailored towards like small startups? Say, could a company like the size of Hootsuite do this?
I think so. There's usually no cap on the companies.
Oh wow.
But there is a limit to this. I mean, there is a limit to like how much this can be done before the money just goes on.
So once the money is run out, they've employed a whole bunch of people.
That's awesome.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah.
They close the program. So these programs are not always open. Right? So this one just opened, so there's money now. If I talk about it 3 months from now, it might only be one spot left.
Okay, interesting.
I have a question. I'm just wondering, because I kind of live downtown, right? I'm born and raised here. So can the people actually need this grant? Like, let's say somebody goes to YMCA, they don't hear about the program. I tell them about the program. Hey, you need to get a job. You got a little bit of something going on. Can they approach it? Also,
Yes.
not.
Yeah. So YMCA helps the employers and employees.
Awesome.
So if you're looking for a job, like the YMCA has a whole bunch of job type programs for people that are under or unemployed to help them get experience and find them.
So my question is essentially, you're hiring people at $1 per hour cost. So for example, like if people, for example, my classmates in CodeCore, they're between 15 to 30 years old, some of them just graduated, they're ready. I mean, I could hire them for 12 weeks while they're in CodeCore, but work for me part-time. And in 12 weeks, they graduate from CodeCore, they become a junior developer.
So it has to be 35 hours per week.
It has to be,
Yeah.
it has to be entirely 35 hours.
Yeah, so this program, it has to be 12 weeks at 35 hours minimum per week.
Okay.
And then you get your $9 subsidy towards those 35 hours per week, which adds up to that $4,000 grant. That was a popular one.
That was.
is probably all too late for the people already that paid CodeCore already, but I talked about this last time, so I think Tam was kind of looking into some actions.
Oh, really?
But he's a busy man apparently, so, but this is a grant still available. It's a job training grant, so this is meant for companies that either want to train an existing employee on a new job skill or want to train somebody that they're hiring on a required job skill. You can get 2/3 of your training costs covered up to $10,000. Right, so if you're a company and I'm going to send my employee to some kind of course worth $6,000, I get $4,000 back. Right? Now the reason I'm showing that here is, like, I'm assuming you guys are not doing a lot of sending employees to training, but self-employed people can be eligible for this training grant as well. Right? So if you're a self-employed person, you say like, hey, I need to gain some HTML5 coding skills for my job, you can actually apply for training cost towards that.
What if it's like a training material? Does it have to be in a class setting or?
So it has to be done by a third party. So it cannot be employee-to-employee training, but you have to go to like a college or any kind of institution that provides the training. So yeah, it has to typically be done third party, ideally in Canada, but and it has to match to the job and be done at fair market value.
Is the applicant the company that's hiring?
The company that's paying for the training is doing it, or the self-employed person. So self-employed, you are the company basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it.
So can we apply for that for our CodeCore tuition?
So I think yes. I don't know if you can apply for it after the fact.
Oh, okay. But the next class that we go for, we apply for in advance.
Yes. Yeah, so I think this one you have to apply in advance, then you get it approved.
Yeah.
Then you spend the money, and then you get the refund once you've spent it.
I'll ask you one question.
And it's 2/3 of the cost, so you still have to raise the leftover anyways. And it's to train employees in future hires as well, right? Not just.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the primary one is for employers to send their employees to training, but with the self-employed angle, I figured there might be some CodeCore connection. So the last two are research grants. So this is if you're doing research and you're trying to bring in some expertise, and the expertise is in the form of a student, whether that's, and there's different flavors, so it can be an undergraduate student, co-op, or a graduate or PhD type student. So the first one, Answer is a big granting agency that pays a lot of professors for their research. As a company, if you're doing something, if you have a technical challenge, a problem that you need some expertise with, and a professor has that area of expertise, and it is a challenging scientific enough problem, you can actually build a relationship with the professor, and the professor in this case would get $25,000 grant to do research on your behalf as the company. And you as a company, you get all the IP and the results from that research. It's a very popular grant. Basically $25,000 worth of work, so you typically end up getting a master's or PhD student to work for you for 4 to 6 months time frame to do results. So a couple of things there. So this only works for companies that have been in business for 2 years or have 2 full-time equivalent employees. So if you're a one-person startup, you don't qualify for this. And you obviously have to have something that's challenging enough for a professor to be of value and be interested in that. But for companies, this is a very popular grant. The other one is a little bit easier. It's a co-op hiring grant. This money goes directly to the company, but again, if you're hiring a co-op student, typically for 16 weeks, typically over the summer, if it's a science or engineering type student, has to be in those departments, you can get $4,500 towards their salary. So that's a fairly easy grant to get if you're in a position to bring in a co-op student and work with them and give them a good experience.
Does engineering include high-tech?
Pardon?
Software programming? Does it include?
Computer science, yeah, but it has to be one of the university students basically.
UBC comp science?
UBC has a few. Just a regular co-op program, right? So this is the time to actually put in jobs for co-op students. they're starting to line up all the jobs for all the summer students. Right? So if you're looking to bring in a co-op student over the summer period, this is where you want to contact the co-op office and submit your job openings. So this one, once you've picked your student, you and the student together apply for the grant, and you as the company get the $4,500. You obviously need to pay the student more money than that, because that wouldn't cover minimum wage, but it's a good contribution.
This one's not 50/50 match, right? There's no objection.
So the co-op one, no, that's just $4,500 towards their salary.
So if you pay guy 4,600.
Well, 16 weeks at minimum wage is going to be more than, it's going to be less than 50%.
So there's not like ratio requirement.
Yeah. And then the answer engage one is 100% grant. After that, once you've had a relationship with a professor, it becomes usually 50-50 contribution. So the company pays half, and then you get a matching grant from answer. So the other very popular one is MyTax. This is basically an internship program for graduate students. So you as a company, if you have a project that a graduate student work on to get experience and to help you with your R&D, you can put in a project. There's 16-week projects as well, so 4 months. It's $15,000 that the student gets paid for that 16-week program, but MyTax will pay half of it. So you get $7,500 in grant money to cover the student. The $7,500 that you pay the student, if it's a science type student that's working on a shred eligible project, that $7,500 is shred eligible, right? So you could get half of that back. So there's leverage to be had there if it's the right type of project. And these ones you can do as many students as you want. They're kind of like Lego block type projects in 4-month increments. 1 or more students, 4 or 8-month type projects.
Do you have to pay taxes on these grants? Like, if I'm...
Well, you're paying the student $7,500 as a salary.
Okay, but the grant you receive from the government, the couple $1,000, you don't have to pay tax.
When you say research topic, does that still have to be science and engineering, or?
So MyTax can be any type of student. So you can have an MBA student coming in to do a market research study. You can have a legal guy coming in. It can be anybody. ANSWERC is the one that's engineering and science based.
Based on experience, what kind of combinations do you see a lot of companies do in terms of applying for the different kinds of grants?
In general?
In general, yeah. Thank you.
It depends a little bit of what space you're in and how R&D and technology heavy it is. But obviously, if you're doing something that's shred eligible, you're likely a good candidate for IRAP. Right? You probably can use some help with ANSWERC or MyTax to bring in some technical expertise, right? So that's kind of more the R&D, technology-heavy type companies. So there's a lot of leverage there. So those are like doing IRAP with Strat and ANSWERC is a very popular combination. Other ones, it's more the hiring ones that you can take advantage of if you're doing less advanced technology type work. So it depends a bit on the flavor of the beast to see which ones make a lot of sense. Okay, the last one, so this is not directly funding, but in BC, there's the BC Innovation Council, and it's actually the only province in Canada that's this well organized. So the BC Innovation Council has kind of created a standard curriculum that allows startups to figure out what their business is, right? So if you have a product idea, you can kind of go through this program. It's kind of I call it sort of a mini MBA, right? But you do your market research, you figure out your financial and business model and all that stuff. It's very structured, very well proven out over the last few years. And basically the BC Innovation Council is working with all these what's called accelerators to deliver this program to startups. And most of them follow the same curriculum. and it's usually very heavily subsidized. You go in, they provide the space, they provide mentorship, which is a key part of this program, right? Is that you're working with a mentor that kind of works with you as you figure this stuff out. So there's a lot of different flavors of it. One that I wanted to highlight, which is a very good match for very early stage companies, is the New Ventures BC. You may know them from the New Ventures BC competition. They do a startup competition each year, but they also now have what's called the Venture Acceleration Program. So VAP is kind of the standard term for that, which they're now recruiting companies to sign up for. This one is nice because it's kind of a part-time program where you can do some of the stuff online and some of the stuff you do in person. But again, it helps you figure out your business and your market idea, and it provides that mentorship, which is of very high value. So if you're interested in that, I'll send you the information and you can apply for that. They're kind of trying to recruit a batch of people to walk through that program with them.
So usually for accelerators, they take a portion of the company in terms of fees, so that was okay.
No, so the ones you're thinking about are the very high-end ones,
Right.
that get you ready for venture capital. These ones, the BC Innovation Council, sort of sponsored ones, they don't take equity typically. They're more a resource that provides knowledge to entrepreneurs to kind of get them to a stage where they can go into these accelerators. Yeah, don't think that these guys take up a big chunk of your time. They provide a lot of value in the program and in the mentorship.
Yeah, because I also spoke to the venture connections for SFU and all that. I think they take a little bit of a portion as well. That's why
Yeah, it depends. Some of them will take a small portion.
But this is okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But all of these, and again, they all have sort of their own sort of flavor and target market and special offers that they have. But it's definitely something worth considering, especially if you're kind of the techie guy and you haven't done much on the business side. This kind of gives you that business knowledge and allow you to figure that out.
Quick question. What is the incentive for the executives that provide advice for this? I'm just curious, out of curiosity.
They're usually, most of the people that are, whether they call them mentors or entrepreneurs in residence, most of them are former executives that are financially independent and are doing this because they enjoy working with young entrepreneurs.
Cool.
Yeah. Some of them are using it to identify the next
Sure.
opportunity that they'll then get involved in, right? But most of them are doing this on a volunteer basis.
Cool.
So to wrap it up, I just wanted to give one example of what we do. So we help people find these programs. Equation was a startup. They were in Wavefront, one of the many companies doing the Venture Acceleration Program. They ended up getting an answer grant and some IRAP money, and what they developed was they developed some sensor technology that you put in a greenhouse that can basically that monitors the plants, and if there's a disease or something else, they'll actually tell you, hey, pot number 52 and warehouse number 3, and greenhouse number 3 has a disease, and you go spray rather than blasting the whole one. So they were kind of running out of cash and about to close up shop actually, when they met with my colleague earlier this year, or earlier in 2014, and he actually introduced them to the IRAP BC, which is the Agricultural Foundation of BC, and they support a lot of R&D in the agricultural space. So they ended up getting a $200,000 grant, and basically gave them another 2 years of runway to develop their product. So if you have anything that's sort of agricultural related or based, there's a lot of money in that space. And in total, we kind of we try to track what our referrals result into. So we've worked with about 700 companies now over the last year and a bit, and we know of over $3 million in funding, whether it's grants or loans or any other type of financial support that the companies that we've worked with have received based on referrals and introductions that we've made. So the program is working. It makes people aware of what's out there, and then it gets you to focus on the right programs that have the highest likelihood of resulting in some funding for you. So, like I said, I have my cards here. This is the end of the presentation. If if you want to set up a meeting, let's swap cards or contact me afterwards. And then wish you all the best of luck and have fun coding the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you, Eric. As well, if anybody has questions about CodeCore, most of the faces that we see here are familiar. But if you do have questions about the bootcamp, you can talk to any of us after. Yeah, and I just want to say too that thanks so much, Eric, because it was actually really interesting. As much as it's difficult to wrap your head around numbers and all the different programs, everybody here is like really kind of into it, you know, out of all the talks. So it's awesome. So
Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll have it all. We'll put everything up online for if anybody wants to see his video, or if you just want all the links and you don't have a chance to